Look at this. Just look at what I pulled from the garden this morning. I have zucchini the size of my forearm, and I am not exaggerating. 3 of them just from one plant, and there are a dozen more babies coming in right behind them. The leaves are dark green, practically glossy, and they are the size of dinner plates. When the morning light hits them, they almost look waxed, like someone came through in the night and polished each one by hand. A month ago, this same plant was yellow, stunted, and giving me one sad, misshapen fruit every 2 weeks. The kind of zucchini that is bulbous at one end and skinny at the other, hard as a rock, with seeds you could use as beads. I changed exactly one thing. One thing that costs less than a single coffee from a vending machine, and it is probably sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now, completely ignored, pushed behind the baking powder and the cornstarch, waiting for a cake that never comes. The reason you have likely never heard of it is honestly kind of annoying. It works too well and costs too little for anyone to sell it to you in a fancy bottle with a cartoon vegetable on the label, and a name that sounds like it was invented in a boardroom. I have been gardening for a good 15 years now, and for most of that time, I believed the lie. I believed that to get a huge harvest, you needed the blue powder, the concentrated liquid in the plastic jug, the stuff with a brand name and a price tag that makes you wince at the checkout. I would stand in the garden center aisle, staring at the shelves, paralyzed by choice. Bloom boosters, root stimulators, fruit setters, micronutrient sprays. Each one promising to unlock the secret potential of my plants. And every year, I would dutifully mix it up, measuring carefully, pouring it on, and get results that were fine. Just fine. Acceptable. Adequate. I would harvest enough zucchini for a few meals, maybe give one to a neighbor, and feel like I had done my job. I thought that was the ceiling. I thought the pictures in the seed catalogs, the ones with perfect, glossy vegetables piled in wicker baskets, were a fantasy, grown in some perfect greenhouse in a climate that doesn't exist, by people with degrees in horticulture and unlimited budgets. Then I spent a summer in a small village in southern Italy, a place so small the streets had no names, just directions, and I saw an old man's garden that rewired my brain. His zucchini plants were not plants. They were small trees. They were prehistoric. The leaves were so huge they shaded the entire bed, overlapping each other like umbrellas, and the fruits, I kid you not, were hanging off the stems like clubs. Dark green, ribbed, massive. They looked like they belonged in a different epoch, when everything grew bigger and wilder. I asked him, through my broken Italian and a lot of hand gestures, what his secret was. He looked at me like I was a little bit simple, a look I have become very familiar with over the years, walked into his kitchen, and held up a small white box. That was it. That was the whole secret. A small white box of something so ordinary, I almost laughed out loud in his kitchen. I did not believe him at first. I thought he was holding out on me, keeping the real magic hidden in a shed somewhere, some ancient family recipe he guarded like a treasure. But he wasn't. And when I finally, years later, remembered that moment, that dusty kitchen, that small white box, and decided to actually test it, my garden exploded. Do you know that feeling when you walk out to your vegetable patch in late July, the air still cool, coffee in hand, and you are excited because you see flowers, lots of big yellow flowers, and then a week later the little fruit behind the flower turns brown and shrivels up and falls off. You poke it with your finger and it just detaches, dropping into the mulch like a tiny surrender. I know that feeling all too well. The disappointment that curdles in your stomach. Or the feeling when the plant itself looks like it's running a fever. The leaves are pale, almost veiny, with a yellowish tint creeping in from the edges like a slow-moving stain. You water it, you worry over it. You stand there with the hose at dusk, spraying the leaves, hoping the cool water will somehow revive it. You maybe spray it with something you bought at the garden center, something that smells chemical and ominous, and nothing changes. It's like watching someone slowly deflate. You get a few zucchini, sure, but they are tough, or they are bitter, or they grow to about 4 inches and then just stop, turning into a hard, waxy little club that's more seed than flesh. You pick it anyway, because you feel like you have to get something for your effort, and it sits on the counter for a week before you throw it in the compost. Hand on heart, how many of you have a garden that looks exactly like this right now? I have been there, more seasons than I care to count. Seasons where I nearly gave up on zucchini entirely, convinced they were just too temperamental for my climate, my soil, my skill level. The problem is not you. It is not your soil necessarily, though soil can always be improved. It is not even the weather, though a heat wave never helps, and a cold snap at the wrong time can set everything back weeks. The problem is that we have been taught to feed our plants like they are machines in a factory, not like living things in a complex biological system. We pour on the nitrogen, and we get a burst of green, leafy growth, and we feel like geniuses for a week. We take pictures, we post them online, we congratulate ourselves. Then the plant hits a wall. It's like feeding a child nothing but sugar and expecting them to grow strong bones. They will run around like crazy for an hour, cheeks flushed, eyes wild, and then they will crash hard. They will lie on the floor, limp and irritable, with nothing left in the tank. That is your zucchini on commercial fertilizer. A big, fast, unsustainable sugar high. The leaves are huge and dark green, but the stems are hollow and weak, and the fruit that tries to form just gives up halfway through. And here is where the usual internet advice starts to roll in, and I need to stop you before you make it worse. You will hear people say, with absolute confidence, the kind of confidence that only comes from reading one article and never actually testing anything, that you just need to add Epsom salts for magnesium, or you need to bury a fish head under every plant, or you need to spray the leaves with a milk solution to prevent powdery mildew. None of these are the root cause. Epsom salts can help, yes, if your soil is actually deficient in magnesium, but for most of us, it is like putting a bandage on a broken leg. You feel like you are doing something, but the underlying problem remains untouched. Burying a fish head is a fantastic way to attract raccoons, skunks, and every stray cat in a 3-mile radius. They will dig up your entire bed, uproot your seedling in the process, and provide a slow-release nitrogen source that is wildly unpredictable and honestly kind of stinks up the place for weeks. A rancid, low-tide smell that clings to your clothes. The milk spray for mildew, that's a treatment for a symptom, not a solution for the underlying weakness that let the mildew take hold in the first place. A healthy, robust plant will shrug off powdery mildew like a minor cold, maybe a few white spots on a lower leaf that never spread. A stressed, malnourished plant gets pneumonia and dies, the white fuzz creeping up the stems, coating the leaves until they cannot photosynthesize anymore. Then there is the nuclear option. The synthetic bloom booster. You know the one, with the high middle number on the NPK ratio, the one in the bottle with the picture of a tomato the size of a pumpkin. And yes, it will force the plant to set fruit. It will literally bully the plant into producing beyond its natural capacity, drawing down its last reserves of energy, mining its own tissues for nutrients, until the whole thing just gives up. You will get one big flush of zucchini, feel victorious, fill your counter with green batons, and then the plant will turn into a crispy brown skeleton, leaves curling, stems hollowing out, a ghost of what it was. It's like curing a headache by cutting off your head. Technically, it works. The headache is gone, but is it a reasonable solution? Is that how we want to garden, burning through plants like disposable batteries? I chased all of these fixes for years. I bought the expensive mycorrhizal inoculants, the powders that promise to introduce beneficial fungi to the root zone. I brewed the compost teas that smelled like a swamp, buckets of brown liquid bubbling on the patio, attracting clouds of gnats. I crushed eggshells into powder and sprinkled them around like some kind of garden witch, casting a spell, white dust on the dark soil. And I got results. Incremental, modest, frustratingly inconsistent results. A little better here, a little worse there. I was working so hard, spending so much mental energy and a not insignificant amount of money, all to achieve what that old man in Italy achieved with a shrug and a white box from his kitchen cabinet. The memory of him, holding that box, would surface every time I opened my wallet at the garden center, and I would feel a pang of something between embarrassment and determination. It was my neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Kowalska, who finally connected the dots for me. She has been growing vegetables on this same plot of land for over 40 years. Her garden is not fancy. It is not a curated Instagram paradise with perfect raised beds and artisanal trellises and matching galvanized watering cans. It is a chaotic, glorious jungle of food. Her tomato plants are taller than she is, tied to stakes with strips of old bedsheet. Her cucumbers form a solid wall of green, a living fence that hums with bees. And her zucchini, well, you already know. They sprawl out into the paths, leaves overlapping, fruits hidden under the canopy like Easter eggs. She is in her late 70s now, and she moves slowly. Her knees are not what they used to be, but her garden produces with a vigor that puts my younger, more energetic efforts to shame. One afternoon, I was leaning on her fence, the chain link cool against my arms, complaining about my blossom end rot on my tomatoes and the bitter, stunted zucchini. I was probably whining, if I am honest. And she just smiled, that patient smile of someone who has known the answer for decades and was waiting for me to be ready to hear it. She wiped her hands on her apron, an old floral thing faded by 1,000 washes, and she said, and I will never forget this, "You are feeding them. I am feeding the earth that feeds them." There is a difference. She did not hand me a bottle. She handed me a small, grease-stained index card with a recipe written in pencil. The handwriting was tiny and precise, the card soft from years of handling. 3 ingredients. That was it. I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. Probably just another miracle internet trick that doesn't actually work at all. I completely understand your approach. I thought exactly the same thing until I saw with my own eyes what this thing can do. The first ingredient on that card was plain baking soda. Yes, the same sodium bicarbonate that you keep in the back of your fridge to absorb odors. The one in the orange box that has been there since last Thanksgiving. Chemically, sodium hydrogen carbonate. That's the one. The second ingredient was something I already had in my pantry. A fine white powder that looks like flour but is actually a powerhouse of a mineral. Something so unassuming you would walk past it 100 times without a second thought. And the third was water. Just water. That is the whole list. The whole secret. 3 things, 2 of them already in your home, 1 of them coming out of your tap. Now let me just show you exactly what this mix is, down to the gram, because precision matters here. This is not one of those, just a pinch of this and a splash of that, recipes that your grandmother might have used, the kind that drives me crazy because you can never replicate the results. The ratio is critical for it to work without causing harm. Too much of the first ingredient, and you will alter the pH of your soil too rapidly and shock the plant, sending it into a kind of metabolic paralysis. Too little and nothing happens. The calcium stays locked up, and you have just watered your plants with mildly salty water for no reason. The old man in Italy and Mrs. Kowalska, separated by thousands of miles and a language barrier and decades of independent experience, had arrived at the exact same ratio. That is not a coincidence. That is a fundamental principle of biology that they both observed and harnessed, a pattern in nature that they noticed and applied. Here is the recipe. Write this down. You will need baking soda, not baking powder. Baking powder has added acids and starches, cream of tartar and cornstarch, that will mess this up, creating a weird gelatinous sludge that does nothing good for your soil. Just pure, plain sodium bicarbonate. You can find it in the baking aisle of any grocery store. A single box will last you an entire season, and it costs maybe $1. Less than $1 if you buy the store brand. You will also need a source of soluble calcium. This is the secret weapon. The old man used a specific type of agricultural powder, something he bought at a farm supply store in a plain paper sack. But Mrs. Kowalska showed me a much simpler, more accessible version. You can use calcium acetate, which you can make yourself for free by dissolving crushed, toasted eggshells in a little bit of vinegar until the fizzing stops, then diluting it with water. It works, and it is satisfyingly DIY, but it takes time and you need a lot of eggshells. But honestly, the easiest, most foolproof method is to get a bag of calcium carbonate powder. It is sold as a dietary supplement, pure limestone powder, or sometimes as a gentle abrasive cleaner. You can find it online, at health food stores, sometimes in the canning section of hardware stores. Make sure it is pure calcium carbonate with no added fragrances, detergents, or flow agents. You don't want your zucchini tasting like lavender, or your soil full of anti-caking chemicals. A 1-pound bag costs about $8 online and will last you several years. That is your second ingredient. The third is just clean water, ideally rainwater collected in a barrel, or water that has been left to sit out overnight so any chlorine can off-gas, but tap water will work in a pinch if you are in a hurry. The exact mix is this. For 1 gallon of water, you will add 1 level teaspoon of baking soda. Not heaping. Level. Scrape it flat with the back of a knife, the way you would for a precise baking recipe. And 1 level tablespoon of the calcium carbonate powder. That is it. 1 teaspoon of soda, 1 tablespoon of calcium, 1 gallon of water. Mix it vigorously with a stick or a long spoon. The calcium carbonate will not fully dissolve. It is not supposed to. It will create a milky suspension, a cloudy white liquid that looks a little bit like the water you rinse rice in. That is exactly what you want. You are not making a solution. You are making a suspension that you will shake before every use, because the calcium particles will settle to the bottom over time. The total cost per gallon, by my calculation, factoring in the price of the ingredients down to the penny, is somewhere between 12 and 18 cents. For a treatment that will cover about 10 to 15 square feet of garden bed. Compare that to the $10 or $15 you would spend on a bottle of concentrated liquid fertilizer that does a fraction of what this does, that you have to measure and dilute and worry about burning your plants with. Now, before you apply this, there is one absolute rule. Do not, under any circumstances, apply this mix to dry soil. I did this once in my eagerness, the first time I mixed up a batch. I was so excited to see results that I poured it onto bone-dry soil in the middle of a hot afternoon. And I watched my zucchini leaves curl slightly at the edges within an hour, a subtle cupping motion, like a hand closing. It was not fatal, but it stressed the plant, which is precisely the opposite of what we are trying to do. I felt like an idiot, standing there with my empty watering can, watching my plants suffer from my impatience. Water your garden deeply the evening before, or at least a few hours before you plan to apply this. Give the soil a good, long soak, the kind where the water pools briefly on the surface before sinking in. The soil needs to be moist, not waterlogged but thoroughly damp, cool to the touch if you press your finger in. This allows the calcium suspension to percolate down into the root zone without creating a high concentration pocket right at the surface that can burn the fine root hairs, those microscopic filaments that do all the actual work of feeding the plant. The application method is just as specific. Do not pour this over the leaves. This is not a foliar spray. If you get it on the leaves, it will leave a white residue that can block sunlight and look unsightly, though it won't do any real harm. This is a soil drench. You want to deliver it directly to the root zone where the magic happens, where the soil biology is most active. Take your gallon of the milky mixture, shake it hard for 10 seconds, feel the slosh of it, and then slowly pour it in a circle around the base of the plant, about 6 inches out from the main stem. Imagine the drip line of the leaves, the outer edge of the canopy where rain would fall off. That is where the feeder roots are, the tiny, hungry roots that reach out horizontally, not the thick anchor roots directly under the stem. Pour it slowly, letting it soak in, watching it disappear into the soil. Do not just dump it in one spot and walk away. Walk the circle. Be deliberate. For a mature zucchini plant with a 2-foot spread, use the entire gallon. For a younger plant, half a gallon is plenty. Apply this mix once every 2 weeks. Not every week. Not every time you water. Once every 14 days. Mark it on your calendar if you have to. Consistency over intensity. That is the mantra. A steady, gentle rhythm, not a violent intervention. I applied this for the first time on a Thursday evening in late June. The sun was going down, the air was cooling, the mosquitoes were just starting to come out. My zucchini plant, a variety called Black Beauty, was in a sorry state. It had been in the ground for 6 weeks, and it was barely a foot across. The lower leaves were yellowing with brown, crispy edges, curling up like old parchment. There were maybe 2 tiny fruits on it, both looking dubious. I took a picture. I am glad I did, because what happened over the next 3 weeks was something I would not have believed without photographic evidence. I would have thought my memory was exaggerating. Within 4 days, I noticed the new growth at the center of the plant was a noticeably darker, richer green. Not a subtle difference. A dramatic one. It looked like a different plant, like someone had swapped it out in the night. By day 10, the existing leaves had stopped yellowing entirely. The progression just halted, frozen in place, and the new leaves were unfurling faster than I had ever seen, pushing up from the crown with a kind of urgent vitality. And then the flowers started coming. Not just a few. A riot of them. Big, turgid, golden yellow flowers that the bees went crazy for, bumping into each other in their haste. And behind every female flower, the ones with the tiny swelling at the base, was a tiny, perfect, dark green zucchini that did not shrivel up. It did not turn brown. It did not detach and fall into the mulch. It just grew, and grew, and grew. Every morning it was visibly larger, smoother, more substantial. 3 weeks to the day after that first application, I harvested 3 zucchini that weighed a combined total of just over 7 pounds. From one plant. In a single day. I put them on the kitchen scale, the one I use for bread dough, and I just stared at the number. The largest was 16 inches long and still tender, with seeds so small they were barely visible, just a faint suggestion of a seed cavity. The skin was thin, you could nick it with a fingernail. The flavor was incredible. Sweet, nutty, dense. Not watery, not bitter. Not that strange soapy aftertaste that stressed zucchini sometimes get. I sliced one raw, sprinkled it with a little flaky salt, and ate it standing right there in the garden, the juice running down my chin. It tasted the way zucchini is supposed to taste, the way it tasted from my grandmother's garden when I was a kid, before I started overcomplicating everything, before I learned to doubt the simple ways. So why does this work? Why does this ridiculously simple, absurdly cheap combination of baking soda and calcium powder trigger such an explosive response? It is not magic. There is no incantation, no special moon phase, no proprietary blend. It is soil chemistry and plant physiology working in harmony, the way they have for millions of years before we showed up with our plastic bottles of blue liquid and our marketing slogans. The first thing to understand is the calcium piece. When we think of plant nutrition, we obsess over nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The big three, the ones on the front of every fertilizer package. But calcium is the truck that delivers all of that. Without adequate, available calcium in the soil, a plant cannot effectively transport the other nutrients into its cells, no matter how much fertilizer you dump on it. The roots can be sitting in a soup of nitrogen and phosphorus, and they will just sit there, unable to move it into the plant's vascular system. It's like having a warehouse full of goods and a fleet of trucks with no wheels. The stuff just sits there, unusable inventory that never ships. Calcium is also the primary building block for cell walls. It forms calcium pectate, the cement that holds plant cells together. A plant with a robust, steady supply of calcium builds strong, thick cell walls that are resistant to pests and diseases. An aphid trying to pierce a calcium-rich leaf is like you trying to bite through a leather boot. A calcium-deficient plant builds weak, leaky cells that are an open invitation to every fungus and sucking insect in the neighborhood. The cell walls are flimsy, they rupture easily, they leak cytoplasm. That is why a calcium-starved zucchini gets blossom end rot, where the tip of the fruit turns black and collapses into a sunken, leathery crater. The cells at the fastest-growing part of the fruit literally cannot hold themselves together. They divide faster than they can build walls, and they rupture and die en masse. But here is the problem that the baking soda solves, and this is the part that most people miss. You can have plenty of calcium in your soil, in the form of limestone or bone meal or eggshells, and your plant can still be starving for it. You could have added a whole bag of lime in the spring, and your soil test could show abundant calcium, and your zucchini could still be showing deficiency symptoms. Why? Because calcium is only mobile and available to plants in a slightly acidic soil environment, a narrow pH window between about 6 and 7. In alkaline soils, above 7, calcium gets locked up in insoluble compounds, chemically bound to other elements in forms the roots cannot absorb. It's there you can test for it, the lab report will show it, but the plant's roots cannot access it. It's like money in a bank account you forgot the password to. In very acidic soils below 5.5, calcium gets leached away entirely, washed down below the root zone by rain, disappearing into the subsoil where the roots cannot reach. Most garden soils, especially the kind of rich, compost-heavy soils we build for vegetables, tend to drift acidic over time. The decomposition of organic matter releases mild organic acids. Rain is slightly acidic, carbonic acid from dissolved carbon dioxide. Even the respiration of the roots themselves releases carbon dioxide, which forms carbonic acid in the soil water. Over a season, your pH can drop significantly without you realizing it. You see the yellowing leaves, the stunted growth, and you think nitrogen deficiency. So you add more compost or blood meal, which as they break down, make the soil even more acidic, and you dig yourself into a deeper hole, season after season. The baking soda is a gentle, temporary pH buffer. It nudges the soil solution in the root zone just slightly back toward neutral, right at the moment you are applying the calcium. This brief window of ideal pH, lasting maybe a few days before the soil biology reasserts its normal equilibrium, is enough for the plant to absorb a massive pulse of soluble calcium and the accompanying micronutrients that were previously locked away. It is like a key turning in a lock, the tumblers aligning for just a moment, and then the door swings open. You are not permanently altering the soil chemistry with a harsh chemical. Sodium bicarbonate is a weak base that reacts with soil acids to produce water, carbon dioxide, and harmless sodium salts in such minute quantities that they are irrelevant, washed away by the next rain or irrigation. The effect is transient, which is why you apply it every 2 weeks, to create that window of availability again and again throughout the peak growing season, like opening a valve on a schedule. The second mechanism at play is even more fascinating, and it is the one that the old man in Italy understood intuitively even if he never put it into words. The sodium in the baking soda, in these incredibly dilute concentrations, actually stimulates a beneficial stress response in the plant. Not a damaging stress, a hormetic response. A tiny, sublethal dose of sodium ions triggers the plant to produce more of its own protective compounds, including antioxidants and sugars. It is the same principle behind why a little bit of drought stress between waterings makes tomatoes sweeter, concentrating the sugars in the fruit. The plant thinks, conditions are getting a bit tough, I had better put more energy into my fruits to ensure the next generation. It diverts resources from leafy growth into reproductive growth, into the zucchini, into the seeds that carry its legacy. This is the old man's secret, the principle observed and harnessed across continents and generations. It is not about force-feeding the plant. It is about speaking to it in its own chemical language, telling it, gently, to focus on what you want to eat. It is a conversation, not a command. The calcium carbonate powder, suspended in the water, settles onto the soil surface and into the top half-inch of the root zone. It coats the soil particles, a fine white dust that slowly incorporates. Over the next 2 weeks, soil microbes and mild acids in the soil slowly break it down, releasing a steady trickle of calcium ions. It is a release mechanism, nature's own slow-release capsule. The baking soda opens the door, and the calcium powder provides the cargo. Together, they do what no bottle of concentrated liquid can. They build soil structure, they feed the microbial life, and they strengthen the plant from the inside out. You are not just feeding the plant. You are feeding the system. Let me address the elephant in the room, because I know someone is thinking it. I can feel the skepticism radiating through the screen. Is this safe? Am I putting something weird into my food? Am I salting my garden soil like the Romans, salting the fields of Carthage? Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. You have eaten it in baked goods your entire life. It is what makes pancakes fluffy. It is in your toothpaste. Calcium carbonate is limestone. It is what eggshells and oyster shells and coral reefs are made of. It is a common ingredient in antacids. People chew it for indigestion, right out of the bottle. This is not a chemical brew. This is not some laboratory synthesis with a 12-syllable name. This is 2 naturally occurring minerals, mixed with water, in concentrations that are safe, gentle, and food grade. The vegetables you grow with this mix are not coated in anything. The mix goes into the soil, where the biology breaks it down and the plant selectively uptakes the ions it needs through its roots, a highly regulated process. You are not spraying the fruit. You are not injecting anything. You are simply restoring a natural balance that modern, intensive gardening practices have depleted, a balance that existed before we started treating soil like an inert medium instead of a living ecosystem. Now, does this work on other plants? I have tested it on tomatoes, on peppers, on cucumbers, and on melons. I did not just stop at zucchini. I had to know. The results are consistent. Tomatoes had fewer issues with blossom end rot than I have ever seen, even on varieties that are notoriously prone to it, like San Marzano and Roma. The peppers, which had been stubbornly holding at about a foot tall for weeks, their leaves slightly puckered, suddenly doubled in size and started setting fruit so heavily I had to stake them with bamboo poles. The cucumbers produced a wall of green, fruits hanging straight and crisp, no bitterness at all. The melons, well, the melons were a revelation. Sweet, fragrant, and abundant, splitting slightly at the stem end when ripe, the way a perfect melon should. The mix is not a nitrogen boost, so you will not see the explosive, leggy top growth that a high nitrogen fertilizer gives you. The kind of growth that looks impressive for a week and then attracts every aphid in the county. What you will see is a plant that looks balanced. Healthy, dark green foliage, thick stems that don't snap in the wind, and a steady, relentless production of fruit. It is the difference between a bodybuilder on steroids and a person who is genuinely healthy from good food and exercise. One looks swollen and unnatural and will crash hard, joints failing, organs stressed. The other is sustainably, deeply robust, capable of handling stress without falling apart. I have also experimented with scaling this up. For a large garden, you can make a 5-gallon bucket of the mix. That is 5 level teaspoons of baking soda and 5 level tablespoons of calcium carbonate powder for 5 gallons of water. Stir it with a stick, a long one, dip in your watering can, and apply around the base of each plant. I treated my entire vegetable garden, roughly 200 square feet, with 2 5-gallon buckets every 2 weeks. The total cost for the entire summer, from June through September, was less than $5. I did not buy a single bottle of fertilizer. Not one. I walked past those aisles in the garden center and felt a kind of giddy freedom. And my harvest was, conservatively, double what I had the previous year, when I was spending $40 or $50 on organic liquid fertilizers and fish emulsion and kelp meal, and all the other potions I thought I needed. There is one caution I need to give you, because I learned it the hard way, and I want to save you the trouble. Do not use this mix on acid-loving plants. Your blueberries, your azaleas, your rhododendrons, your hydrangeas, your camellias. These plants have evolved to thrive in low pH soils with a pH of 4.5 to 5.5, and the baking soda will raise the pH in the root zone and interfere with their iron uptake. You will give them chlorosis, where the leaves turn a sickly yellow while the veins stay green, a classic sign of iron deficiency. The plant cannot produce chlorophyll without iron, so it slowly starves. If you want a calcium boost for your acid lovers, use a gypsum solution instead. Calcium sulfate. It provides calcium without altering the pH, because it is pH neutral. For everything else in the vegetable garden, the mix is safe and effective. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, cucumbers, squash, melons, beans, peas, leafy greens. All of them will benefit. I think about that old man in Italy a lot these days. I think about his kitchen, the worn tile floor, the smell of olive oil and garlic. I think about how he looked at me when I asked him for his secret, and how I almost dismissed it because it was too simple. I almost walked away from the answer, because it did not come in a package that matched my expectations. We have been conditioned to believe that complex problems require complex, expensive solutions. That if a solution is cheap and simple and made from things in your kitchen, it cannot possibly be as good as the stuff in the shiny bottle with the scientific-sounding name and the price tag that stings. That is a lie that has been sold to us, and we have bought it for generations. The truth is, the best solutions are often the old ones. The ones our grandparents knew before the marketing departments got involved, before the agricultural extension offices were replaced by corporate sales reps. Mrs. Kowalska knew it. That old Italian man knew it. The Incas knew it when they built terraces and managed soil pH with wood ash and limestone, creating some of the most productive agricultural systems in human history. The farmers of the Fertile Crescent knew it when they rotated crops and amended their fields with mineral powders, maintaining soil fertility for millennia without a single bottle of synthetic fertilizer. This knowledge is not new. It is just forgotten, buried under a mountain of advertising and product launches, and the relentless message that you need to buy something to fix your problems. You don't. You really don't. You need a box of baking soda, a bag of calcium carbonate, and a watering can. That is it. That is the whole idea. No bills, no infrastructure, and no asking anyone's permission. Just you, understanding a fundamental principle of how plants work, and applying it with patience and consistency. The power is in your hands, and it always has been. The thing that gets me every time, the thing that still makes me shake my head when I walk out into my garden in the morning, coffee in hand, the grass still wet with dew, is how different the plants look. They look proud. They look like they are standing up straight, holding their leaves out to the sun with confidence, with a kind of quiet dignity. A stressed plant looks hunched. Its leaves curl inward. Its color fades to a sickly pallor. It looks like it is enduring life, just trying to survive another day. A plant that has what it needs looks generous. It looks like it wants to give you something, like it is overflowing with abundance. And this mix, this absurdly simple, stupidly cheap mix, gives the plant what it needs. Not what the fertilizer company needs to sell you. What the plant needs. The difference is visible, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. If you try this, and I hope you do, take a picture before you start. Take a picture of your saddest, most disappointing plant, the one you have almost given up on. Then apply the mix, once every 2 weeks for a month. Take another picture. Compare them side by side on your phone. I want you to see the difference with your own eyes, because seeing is believing, and believing is the first step toward unlearning all the nonsense we have been fed. Send me that picture. I want to see your zucchini explode. I want to hear about your harvest, the weight of it, the taste of it. I want this knowledge to spread from gardener to gardener, neighbor to neighbor, index card to index card, until the companies that sell the blue powder start to wonder where all their customers went. Until they have to go back to the drawing board and figure out why no one is buying their expensive bottles anymore. Thank you for being here, for being curious, for being willing to question the conventional wisdom. That is what real gardening is. Not just planting seeds and pulling weeds, but paying attention, experimenting, and remembering the old ways before they are lost for good. If this helped you, if it saves you money or makes your garden burst with life, share this with someone who is struggling with their zucchini right now. Let's bring this forgotten knowledge back, one backyard at a time.